Good evening. We're going to give folks a moment to get on. So we'll start in just a moment or two.
Or three.
Or three. Well, it's 7:01 already, Adrian.
I know, people are still logging on.
Logging on. All right, we're going to start in just one moment. Give people another second to log on. Let the train go by my apartment. Okay, great. I think we'll start. Good evening. My name is Julie Ty, and I'm president of the New York League of Conservation Voters Education Fund. I'm excited to be here tonight with our partner, Citizens Campaign for the Environment, and Ørsted and Eversource tonight to learn more about and celebrate renewable energy and offshore wind for New York as we approach the time when offshore wind moves from being a concept and into turbines spinning off our shores to provide clean energy for our communities. This webinar is part of our ongoing partnership with CCE to educate New Yorkers about issues related to clean energy, in particular offshore wind, and provide opportunities for you to get updates on the status of projects that are moving forward in our state. As the state is looking to transition to a green economy, we'll be electrifying much more of our transportation system and changing how we heat and cool our homes. And the linchpin to this transition is to switch our energy sources to renewables. That's why advancing clean energy and offshore wind in a way that protects the environment and our communities is a top priority for us at NYLCV Education Fund. Wind energy can power millions of homes across New York, contribute to our economic recovery, create green jobs, support our communities, and slash pollution, all while keeping marine life safe. Offshore wind is already making Long Island a leader in green power. In 2019, New York committed to bringing 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind online by 2035. New York currently has 5 offshore wind projects in active development, the largest offshore wind pipeline in the nation. More than 4,300 megawatts are under contract with the state, representing nearly 50% of the capacity needed to meet New York's offshore wind goal of 9,000 megawatts by 2035. And just today, we were very excited that the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM, announced the sale of leases for 6 new areas in the New York Bight in the Atlantic off the coast of New York and New Jersey, which will enable both of our states to keep moving forward on our clean energy goals. And we have one of the most ambitious climate laws in the world, and we're already a leader in offshore wind development. Through the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, New York has set a goal of zero emission electricity by 2040, including 70% renewable energy generation by 2030, and we aim to reach an economy-wide carbon neutrality. Building off of today's announcement about the new offshore wind lease areas, Governor Hochul committed in her State of the State address last week to procure up to 2 gigawatts of offshore wind as the state seeks to reduce reliance on polluting fossil fuel powered plants, enough to power 1.5 million homes, bringing the state's combined total to more than 4.5 million homes powered by offshore wind. But she went further, and she made commitments to investing $500 million in critical offshore wind infrastructure in ports, manufacturing, and supply chain infrastructure, leveraging private capital to deliver more than $2 billion in economic activity and create more than 2,000 good-paying green jobs. They are planning to initiate a future offshore wind transmission network to power up to 4 million New York City homes to identify strategic offshore wind cables and access point of the onshore transmission grid that can interconnect at least 6 gigawatts of offshore wind into New York City. And they're launching the 2.0 of the offshore wind master plan for deep water. Building on the success of their award-winning offshore wind master plan, they will initiate this new plan to look at the next frontier of offshore wind development. And ultimately, offshore wind will help us reduce our reliance on power plants, which are all too often polluting our environmental justice frontline communities. By developing offshore wind projects in these windy areas, New York can continue to be a leader in the industry, and these initiatives will not only help us meet our climate goals, but also create good jobs. We're excited to hear from experts from Ørsted and Eversource on their active offshore wind projects tonight. And now I'll be handing this over to my partner, Adrian Esposito.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Adrian Esposito. I'm the Executive Director of Citizens Campaign for the Environment. Thank you for joining us this evening. And as Julie said, look, this is a good news time for offshore wind and renewable energy in general. And you might be saying to yourself, why do we need to do this? Well, we need to do this because I know this won't be shocking for many of you, climate change is real. And if we just look at some of the headlines over the last couple of weeks or couple of months, we find that the last 7 years have been the warmest on record since since they've been keeping track of yearly temperatures. Another fun fact is that the ocean water temperature is the highest it's been ever since ocean water temperatures have been recorded, and that has been done. They've been monitored for the last 6 decades. And the higher the water temperature in the oceans are, the more climate change will accelerate. And then sometimes people will ask, and some of you might ask at the end of this webinar, what is the cost of wind? And I want you to know that's a good question, but it needs to be answered in the context of what is the cost of climate change? New report just out this week that weather disasters fueled by climate change cost the United States of America $750 billion over the last 5 years. That's a hefty price tag. In 2021, just last year, there were 20 separate large-scale climate events that cost us $145 billion to recover from. Those are high costs associated with climate change. So whether it's tornadoes or hurricanes or fire or drought or pounding rain events, you name it, that not only causes property damage, lives have been lost. In specific, 688 lives last year were lost because of climate events. So when we talk about the cost of transitioning from fossil fuels to renewables, we need to compare that to the cost of doing nothing, which is what we're paying right now. And this is exciting times. I mean, we are watching an historic moment right now. We are transitioning from a fossil fuel and an oil-based economy to renewable energy. And the benefits of that are numerous. So that's why CCE and the League of Conservation Voters have teamed up to partner in supporting offshore wind with a rigorous and site-specific environmental review. It's not a free pass, but it is a necessity to make this transition so that we can fight climate change. We can have a sustainable planet. And I know there's people from all over the state of New York and Connecticut on with us tonight. But those of you who live on Long Island, we're on the front lines. We're on the front lines of climate change. And I think it was pretty disturbing for us to realize that 6 tornadoes touched down last September, and that was another first in history. So whether it's rising sea levels, tornadoes touching down, hurricanes, we're on the front lines and we need to act. And we're happy and pleased that we're in a state that is acting. And that's, the state of New York, which is bringing change. So we're delighted to be able to bring to you one of the offshore wind companies called Ørsted. They have contracted for 2 different of the 5 offshore wind farms that are moving through the siting and the permitting process in New York State. And they're going to talk to us about their 2 projects. We are happy to have with us this evening Jen Garvey, who leads the market affairs for Ørsted New York, and also Ken Bowes, who's the Vice President of Offshore Wind Permitting and Siting for Eversource Energy. And they'll tell you this, but their projects, actually both of their projects, will be directly connecting into the Long Island market. So I'm going to turn it over right now to Jennifer Garvey. Jennifer?
Okay, good evening. Are we good? Are we up? Am I up? Okay.
Yes, you're good.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you kindly for this opportunity. Thank you to the New York League of Conservation Voters. Thank you to Citizens Campaign for the Environment. Thank you, Julie and Adrian specifically. And we're really pleased to have this opportunity this evening to share your evening, frankly, and to talk to you about our projects. I do have a couple of slides, some slides that we'll be putting up. So, Mike, if you wouldn't mind sharing those. And while he's working on those, I'll just say that obviously exciting day today for the industry in general. You know, couldn't have picked a better day to be talking about offshore wind. Just keep the momentum going here. But offshore wind it's obviously our #1 goal we have is protecting our planet. It's the transition to clean energy. But offshore wind is also about opportunity. There is so much opportunity that comes with the emergence of this industry here in the US. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry that's emerging. Our couple of projects alone represent hundreds of millions of dollars being invested into New York. There's more to come. There's other developers, and obviously, as we saw today, there'll be an even greater queue of projects going forward to in order to reach the state goals, the federal goals for offshore wind. And so this is a really exciting time. So we thank you for this opportunity. And I will say, there's a lot of people who follow along with our projects really closely. We've got a great audience today, a big audience, diverse. And so for some of you, I hope this feels like not totally new material. You're hearing about the milestones that we talk about along the way. I know for some of you, this is also totally brand new. And so welcome. But we have a great story to talk about. We've hit a lot of milestones this year for our projects, and we are starting construction on New York's first offshore wind farm in just a few weeks here. So lots to look forward to. Mike, if you can go to the next slide. Okay, well, first, a little bit about our team, our joint venture team. Obviously, I'm from Ørsted. Our joint venture partner is Eversource. Ørsted is a renewable energy company. We are the global leader in offshore wind. Ørsted was actually the very first to install turbines in the water off the coast of Denmark. That was back in 1991. Today, we own and operate about 25% of all offshore wind in operation. It's over 1,000 turbines. I think it's in excess of 1,200 turbines at this point around the globe. So it's our core business. We are actually an oil and natural gas company that transitioned into a renewable energy company. So it's a really cool story. And hey, if we can do it, others can do it too. Eversource is New England's largest energy provider. It's also a company with a more than 100-year history of working in the Northeast. They know our energy systems, our energy needs, the nature of our reliability systems, and they are a really terrific experienced partner to have. Particularly as we move into this construction phase. And they too have a very well recognized track record in energy efficiency and also sustainability. So together, I think we've got a really fantastic team to deliver on projects for New York. Next slide. So just getting right into it. This is the lease area that we have. We talked about some of the lease areas, obviously, that are coming online or about to become available, that are farther offshore. But these dark blue lease areas are the combination of lease areas that we own together as a joint venture team, and this is where our projects will be located. They are about 30 miles at the closest point to the tip of New York. They're Montauk Point, the most easterly point, the most easterly area in New York to these lease areas. And we are developing two projects within these lease areas for New York, the two that are dotted here on the map. The first one is South Fork Wind on the east end of Long Island. That one will connect into the town of East Hampton. It's a smaller project, about 132 megawatts, but still power for 70,000 homes each year. The second project is Sunrise Wind, a much larger project, and that will connect into the middle of Long Island there, into the town of Brookhaven, a community called Holbrook. And this area, out of this lease area, we're also building a project for Rhode Island and Connecticut. It's called Revolution Wind. And we have a lot of capacity left to build more projects. So hopefully more to come on that front for New York as well. But just wanted to point to the proximity of our lease areas relative to New York and other states. And we can head to the next slide. So in terms of timelines, these projects are obviously moving they started at very different points in time. They're moving at different paces. South Fork Wind is our trailblazer here. It began in 2017 with an award from LIPA. And since it takes some time after you get an award to kind of put your permit applications together, there's a lot of community output or community engagement involved in this effort to try and craft the right application to go forward to the permitting agencies. And our permitting story began in 2018. And obviously it's taken us several years. Here we are in 2022, and we are just days away, we hope, from securing our final permits, the permits that will allow us to start construction. And that is scheduled to begin at the end of January. So just a high level look at the number of years it takes to get a wind farm going. We think that some future projects might move a little faster. I will say that there was a change in administration. The Biden administration has obviously been hugely supportive of offshore wind. We did see a bit of a slowdown during the prior administration, and we have that to attribute to some of the delay in permitting here. But we're moving ahead with Sunrise Wind at a good clip. A project award in 2019 from NYSERDA as part of New York State's broader master plan for offshore wind. It was the very first project to be awarded in the first solicitation that NYSERDA ran. Again, it takes many months to put your permit applications together. It's a lot of community input together. And I want to emphasize too that throughout the entire permitting process, input is central to the way that projects are reviewed. And so we're constantly hearing from communities and from stakeholders about what might improve projects and looking to incorporate that feedback. And as you can see here, it does take a number of years before we can start construction. But relative to the whole time frame, you can see the yellow arrows are obviously where we are today for each of our projects. Just getting ready for construction for one and about midway through permitting for the other. But we've got a lot of other milestones that we're hitting in the meantime while we go through these permitting exercises that we'll get to. Next slide. So South Fork Wind is as I mentioned, our trailblazing project for New York. It's New York's very first offshore wind farm. This was a project that was awarded by LIPA back in 2017 in response to an RFP that was looking for the most cost-effective way to address an energy supply need on the South Fork of Long Island. It was awarded together as part of a portfolio of projects that have already been built, some utility scale battery storage, the first in the state, and a demand energy response program. It's also the project that's allowing LIPA to best meet its sustainability goals. And this is the footprint of this project is located in the town of East Hampton. And so, it's taken a huge amount of leadership on the part of the community there to embrace this project, to support some of the real estate rights that we need in order to bring this project to fruition. And all of that has been secured over the past few years in working closely with the community. They've been participants in the permitting process, very active participants in the permitting process. There's been a huge amount of engagement with the local community. They ask a lot of good questions. They certainly have, they read things very carefully. It's a very informed community. And so I think it's been the outcome of this project and some of the conditions that we've been able to put together to protect the environment, to protect the community, I think, will deliver a really excellent project. You can go to the next slide, please. And with that, I'm actually going to hand this over to Ken Bowes. Ken has been working for Eversource for well over 30 years now. He's built a lot of projects. We couldn't ask for a better expert to be leading the way for onshore siting it and oversight of the construction phase here. And Ken's going to walk us through some of the detail here on South Fork.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. So my pleasure to be with you. I know we're going to have a Q&A session at the end as well, and we'll try to take as many questions as we can this evening. So with Jen kind of introduced South Fork Wind, and what I'm going to do now is go through several slides that talk about more of the details. We've basically completed the design phase of this project, and with that, the various state permits that go with that. And now, as Jen mentioned, we await the federal permits, the final permits next week, and then we'll begin construction. We've done many things in the design, though, to minimize impact on the community. It has been a robust stakeholder process with Wainscott and the town of East Hampton. And the state agencies have also been very active. I think they really want to make sure that the first wind farm in New York has all of the right requirements that go with it, including the environmental requirements. But some of the things that we've agreed to do is maintain access to the beach and residences during construction. There are about 200 residences along the path, most of those along the Long Island Railroad, which you'll see in a few slides. But there will be several, about 70 or so residents that we do pass by on the 2.4 miles in town roads. We've also agreed to avoid construction during the busy summer season. Obviously, it's a very robust tourist area, lots of activity in the summer months. So you're going to see us take pauses for this coming summer of 2022 and also the summer of 2023. So there won't be any work done in town roads during those summer seasons. We're also avoiding disturbance to the beach. We're going to be drilling under the beach with a technology called horizontal directional drill, which I'm going to highlight in an upcoming slide as well. The town of East Hampton has some pretty stringent noise regulations, and we plan to comply with all of those, both during construction and also for during operation at our substation. Some of those things that we've done are limiting construction work hours, limiting time of day, seasonal, and for the substation itself, it will be enclosed with a perimeter wall that will minimize the noise to the local community. I mentioned the cable depth, or the HDD, that allows us to drill under the beach and allows us to avoid erosion and exposure of the cable, which other projects have seen on the coast of New York. So we're going to be very deep under the beach here, and there's a graphic that I'll go into with more detail. And also our main goal is here to leave the conditions better than we found them, which means repaving the streets, reseeding the areas adjacent to the streets, and really making sure that the residences are comfortable with where we've left everything at the end of construction. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the construction schedule. I know this is a tight slide to view and lots of detail on it, but I'm going to walk through it in some detail. But it's also available, and you'll see an upcoming slide where you can view this at your leisure, at our website in a construction tab in that virtual meeting room. So here there's 3 segments that I'm going to talk about. The first segment is the sea to shore transition, and that construction actually doesn't start in this spring or this winter time. This will start in the fall of 2023. But there is work along Beach Lane that will begin. It gets us ready to do that horizontal directional drill near the end of Beach Lane. That includes putting in the duct bank and a couple splice faults, one about 500 feet off the beach, which is called the transition joint bay, which is where the horizontal directional drill will be done from, as well as where the submarine cable from offshore meets the onshore cable. And then towards the north end of Beach Lane, another vault will be installed. And the duct bank between those two, which is an excavation about 3 to 4 feet wide, about 5 to 6 feet deep, for that about 2,000 feet or so along Beach Lane. And that construction will start in the end of January, February timeframe this year. The second phase is also on town roads, and it's the continuation of that. And there will be work on several of the town roads that lead up to Long Island Railroad. And that type of work, that's in the blue area now to the right, and shows again, work being conducted along the Long Island Railroad, continuous from this month on until about this time, a little bit later next year. That's about 13 months of construction along the Long Island Railroad. But again, the portion in town roads of the blue will cease at the end of April and then restart again in the fall of 2022. The third and final area is the substation itself. That's actually where the first work will start, and that will be the tree clearing about 2.7 acres, a parcel right next to the existing National Grid generating plant and the existing LIPA East Hampton substation. So there'll be some clearing there done in the first quarter of this year, and then the construction of the substation will begin. And that's about a little over a year in duration as well. Should finish up in July of 2023. And then the testing and commissioning will begin at that substation. So there will be ongoing activity there. It'll be much lighter in context, and it really deals with energizing the offshore substation and then commissioning each of the wind turbines in the summer and fall of 2023. Next slide, please. So a little bit about that Cedar Shore transition. And again, this work is not really starting in the spring or the first part of 2022. This will be the work that we do in the fall of 2022, starting in the October timeframe and then going through the winter months. And what's entailed here is what's called a horizontal directional drill. It starts with an excavation and a casing pipe being installed. Then a drill rig is used to drill under the beach. In this case, we have a 30-foot minimum requirement. The final design came in at about 84.5 feet below the head of the beach. So it'll be much deeper than what was originally contemplated. And we were actually able to do that because of the favorable geotechnical samples that were taken. You may remember the large offshore rig that was used a few months ago off Wainscott Beach. Those samples that we obtained allowed us to go deeper in our design and ultimately will avoid any washouts or exposure on Wainscott Beach in the future. People that are familiar with Wainscott Beach, it's a very dynamic environment. And from the head of the beach out into the water is about 1,700, almost 1,800 feet. So we're well into the water and well beyond the near surf zone, where we do have many surfers and swimmers in the summer months. Surfers are there year round, but again, we want to avoid any impacts to the recreational uses at the beach, including in the near shore area. And this technology will allow us to do that. Again, this technology or this time frame was number one on the previous slide, and really starts in the fall of 2022 and will be finished up in the spring of 2023. Next slide, please. So the onshore, the work that we talked about along Beach Lane that will start in this time frame in the next few weeks is really excavating a duct bank. Inside the duct bank are conduits, and then it's backfilled with a low-grade thermal concrete. So it's a softer concrete than you'd see in a building foundation. What it does is it allows the moisture to be absorbed in there and keeps the cables nice and cool during their operating period. We've had very good success with this technique. It allows for a very fast installation, and consider about one dump truck being removed per hour and one concrete truck installing this concrete per hour. So on the course of a day, you could see half a dozen to 10 trucks, both excavating and being removed, and then concrete trucks coming in at about one per hour to fill this in. On the right-hand side, you see a pictorial of the temporary patch that is placed over the duct bank and roadway. And ultimately, this will be installed during the construction phase. And then ultimately, the entire road will be milled and then paved from edge to edge. I would say curb to curb, but there are no curbs along this portion of the town roads in East Hampton. But edge to edge, so the entire roadway will be paved. There are 10 vaults along the path, including the one at the end of Beach Lane, and about 5 in town roads beyond the transition joint bay, and then 4 or 5 along the Long Island Railroad. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a view simulation before and after, and this is actually Beach Lane. What you'll notice here is it's the last few hundred feet of Beach Lane, and you can see where on the right-hand side there's a couple manhole covers, and that's what will be left when the work is done. We're also been undergrounding some of the facilities here at the end of Beach Lane to allow for the work zone for this fall's work of that horizontal directional drill. So the electric, the communications, and the water systems have been relocated along Beach Lane to allow this work to proceed. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a complicated slide, and it's a different look at the offshore wind farm. So if you were looking down from an airplane, this is the view that you would see. This diagram shows, the positions of the potential offshore wind turbines, and there were 18 total positions originally in our filing with the federal government, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, in our construction operations plan. Out of the process that went through, including the full NEPA review, which includes an environmental impact statement, and working with stakeholders, both in New York, Rhode Island, and at the federal level, the National Marine Fisheries Service specifically, we've selected 12 turbine locations and 1 substation location. And we've really optimized the design here by selecting areas in this underlying layers of images as well as colors show what could be considered, and I say could be because it's technically not, it's the habitat environment of the bottom of the seafloor. And what it demonstrates is that the darker colors are where there's a higher likelihood of essential fish habitat or the spawning and development of fishing. And you can see we've selected locations that are just outside in the lighter colored areas, as well as routing of our cables to avoid as many of these areas as possible. And BOEM complimented us on our design process we went through. We didn't just look at the turbine locations, we also looked at the overall impacts of avoiding boulders, avoiding essential fish habitat, and the cable routing itself to try to minimize the overall impact. You'll also see here that the turbines are spaced apart in a grid-like pattern. It's called the 1 nautical mile by 1 nautical mile spacing. All of our projects will have this spacing in a contiguous manner. So Revolution Wind, South Fork Wind, and Sunrise Wind, as well as future projects, Sunrise 2 or 3 or 4, will also have this pattern. So what this allows for is safer navigation through the wind farm, and ultimately the ability to do certain types of fishing within the wind farm as well. And this was approved by the US Coast Guard, and really is the same for all of the offshore wind development for these 6 lease areas that are contiguous off the coast of New York. It's not the same as it is for other locations, but all of these lease areas, including the ones owned by Ørsted and Eversource, but also all of the other projects out there, will use the same spacing. Next slide, please. So I mentioned before that there is a view of our construction readiness, project overview, environmental, EMF, fisheries. These tabs or these workrooms are all available, and lots of information can be gleaned at your leisure to look at the South Fork Wind Farm as we approach construction. And I'd encourage you to go look at some of the materials, and a lot of your questions may be answered there as well. Next slide, please. At this point, I'm going to transition to the second project in New York, which is called the Sunrise Wind Farm. And this project, as Jen mentioned, is much larger. It's actually located in the offshore portion a little bit further to the east, so a little bit further away from the coast. And it also has a much longer interconnection, which you'll see in an upcoming slide. It's well over 100 miles to the point we come on shore, and about another 18 miles onshore. So it really goes into the central part of Long Island in the town of Brookhaven to a LIPA substation called Hope. And this contract was awarded in the first set of New York bids with NYSERDA. And right now, we are in the middle of siting and permitting. Our federal permits have been applied for, the construction and operation plan, We've filed several supplements based on information requested from BOEM and other federal agencies. On the state side, we filed our Article 7 application. It was deemed complete last year, and we started settlement with the various stakeholders and parties, which include all of the New York State agencies that would regulate the project. And that's been ongoing for a little over 3 months now. We'll come out of the settlement process in the first quarter of this year, and then have the evidentiary process, if there is one, and ultimately get a commission approval about mid-year 2022. That fuels the second part of the process, which is the environmental management and construction plan. So that's a several thousand-page document that really details the means and methods and all of the mitigation plans that we'll put in place to make sure the project done is completed in an expeditious but also an environmentally sensitive way. The federal permits on this will come out in the middle of 2023. The construction operation plan approval in August, and then final permits, or I should say the record of decision in August, and the final COP approval in the fourth quarter of 2023. This project is a little bit larger. It's going to have up to 100 plus turbines compared to the 12 for South Fork. So the construction period is considerably longer than it is for South Fork. But also a bigger onshore scope. I mentioned 18 miles versus the 4 miles for South Fork. A lot more jobs will be created. And the substation itself for this project is a different type of design. It's called an HVDC system. And that's really due to the length of the location from the wind farm offshore to Holbrook, 106 miles, I mentioned offshore, 18 miles onshore, a very long distance. It's not the first HVDC project in Long Island. We have both the cross-sound cable and the Neptune cables that provide power on a daily basis to Long Island. But this will be the first high voltage direct current offshore wind farm in the US as well as in New York. Next slide, please. So this gets into the details, as I mentioned, some of the location on the left-hand side and where the offshore wind farm will be, the location of the export cable that goes from the offshore wind farm to Smith Point County Park, where we'll come onshore. And as you see here, on the right-hand side, we will, Fire Island National Seashore is where the horizontal directional drill will start from. But then we also have a very long horizontal directional drill under the intercoastal waterway. So that technique is used both for the sea to shore transition, but also to go under the intercoastal waterway, again, to minimize the environmental impacts from the construction activities. Really has very little impact except at the two locations where you start the drill and where the drill comes out. In this case, we'll drill from the mainland out to the Fire Island and then install the cable beneath the intercoastal waterway. From there, it goes for about 16.5 miles to a location on Union Avenue in the town of Brookhaven. It's a pre-disturbed area. We purchased a couple parcels from existing industrial uses, including a concrete manufacturer. It's adjacent to an existing power plant, a tank farm, and other industrial uses. So it's a good reuse of a brownfield site, and we look forward to starting that construction again towards the end of 2023. And then from that substation, we'll interconnect to the Holbrook substation about 1 mile away. One thing unique here on the top left-hand is it's not a direct perpendicular entry in New York State waters. So versus the entry for South Fork, which is about 3.5 miles in state waters, this will be coming on a diagonal. And that was selected purposely because it minimizes the environmental impacts through this location, but it does mean we'll extend for about 6 miles in New York waters. Next slide, and I think at this point I'm turning back to Jen Garvey.
Hi there. So just to hit on some of the milestones that we have achieved over the past year and then some. This is sort of a milestones in pictures, if you will, but we spent a lot of time doing site investigation, and I know there's some discussion before of the lift barge that was offshore, off the coast of Wainscott, off the coast of Smith Point Beach. It was a spectacle when it was out there. Obviously made an Instagram feed here, but the intention here is just that we do a huge amount of site investigation because we want to know as much about the location that we're working in as possible in order to just to design the best possible project. We want to, account for anything that we might find underground, for example, to make sure that all of our engineering design is aware of what may exist there. This includes there's a lot of survey work that goes on, soil testing. These were offshore soil testing. That was the work that was done on this lift barge. It obviously had to come quite close to shore, and so that's the need for this large vessel that stands up out of the water and is protected from wave action. But in general, it's a really thorough site assessment process, so that the goal is that there are no surprises when you move to construction, and also just to inform the engineering design process to prove that you've selected the least impactful way of approaching your point of interconnection. Next slide. But that means like a team of people have been out there over the past couple of years, basically. I mean, we have surveyors, out in working in the roads, these site investigation teams doing this soil boring work. We also have a deep bench of folks working at their desks, of course, doing planning work and research and developing different sets of plans. We have a team of attorneys, as you might imagine, as well. But there is a really deep bench of people that are a part of the development of these projects, and those are all jobs just to get to the point where we can begin construction. We also purchased a building, a very large building. It's about 45,000 square feet, and it's located in East Setauket, New York. So as part of our commitments for the Sunrise Wind Project, and I should mention that NYSERDA in New York obviously has the largest offshore wind goal in the entire state. It's in the entire nation, rather. It's 9 gigawatts by 2035. And, they're really going big soon with the specific intention of trying to capture as much of the supply chain pie as they can, and making sure that New York really becomes a hub for offshore wind development that is recognized as a, central to the industry throughout the entire Eastern Seaboard. So, as part of our commitment under Sunrise Wind, we have agreed to locate our operations and maintenance headquarters, which is, and by headquarters, I mean it's a regional headquarters. It will serve all of our projects here in the Northeast. This operation will be located in this lovely building that we have purchased in East Setauket. And so we have about 22 people that we'll be hiring in this year alone. This particular building is still being renovated. And so it will be ready at the beginning of 2023, but this will really be an essential part of our operation, our operations and maintenance operation for decades to come. Offshore wind installations have expected engineered lives of about 25 years. We have projects starting up at different times. So, this is a much longer term investment into the Long Island community. So we look forward to all of the work that's occurring here. There will be certainly more people located out of this building in time. In general, our commitment to the operation and maintenance headquarters in this area of Suffolk County, together with the location of you'll see it in a moment here, but the location of our service operation vessel at its home port will be Port Jefferson. But this commitment alone will generate about 100 jobs, long-term jobs in the region for Suffolk County. Next slide. So also this year, we did begin hiring for our first round of offshore wind technicians. These are the people who will work out at sea. They will be out on our turbines each day, just doing routine maintenance. They're also there to, if there should ever be an issue with the turbine, they go out to fix it. They do a lot of regular maintenance, but they effectively live at sea, and so these are These are a unique crew of people, the first that we've hired here in the United States. They will, because we don't have many offshore wind turbines here just yet, they will need to go to train to Europe for this first round of train. It's just this first round of training. Future training, will begin to take place here in the United States as we have more turbines for them to work on. It's about 18 months of training that is required in order to become an offshore wind technician, and this group really needs to hit the ground running. So the first turbines will be coming online, obviously, in 2023 to support as part of Southwark Wind, and shortly thereafter we'll have the turbines for one of our projects serving the Northeast, Revolution Wind, as well as Sunrise Wind. So a lot of work ahead. These are long-term jobs, as you might imagine, and they're really high-value jobs. Ørsted is investing heavily in the training of these folks, and so we want them to be with us for as long as they are willing, and they are really important assets to the company. So that hiring round has been underway this past fall. It was 11 technicians that we're hiring in this initial round, and so we look forward to sending the first folks that have accepted offers from us over to Europe to train beginning in March. And so that's a really exciting development for us. Just even thinking that, we're so close to steel in the water, if you will, that we're preparing our wind turbine techs. Go to the next slide. And so this is that surface operation vessel that I mentioned. This is where the turbine technicians will live. This is an enormous vessel, about the size of a large ferry, and it's, like as I mentioned, its home port will be in Port Jefferson, New York, on the North Shore of Long Island, if that's not a location that you recognize. And the function of this boat is it's really a workhorse. It's meant to live at sea, but this is where, rather than having technicians coming back and forth from the wind farm every day, this boat is where they'll live for 2 weeks on, and then they'll come to shore for 2 weeks. But this is their home for 2 weeks at a time. And the boat is specially outfitted so that you can see this sort of tall tower on the boat there. That's actually kind of like it's a walkway that will connect directly to the upper part of the turbine, so that they can walk directly onto the turbine without having to kind of climb up a ladder from the very bottom there. They'll get right onto the base platform of the turbine. But this is a vessel that is currently under construction. We announced this charter agreement last year. And so it takes a couple of years to build, but we look forward to this being ready and to housing our offshore wind mechanics. Next vessel, or next slide. This was another important milestone that we checked off this year. Ørsted and Eversource is certainly committed to the establishment of a U.S. supply chain for offshore wind, and we have some really unique vessels that need to be built in order to make that happen. It does take time, and this is the first offshore wind vessel that has been commissioned. This is specifically for turbine installation. It's actually being built by a company called Dominion, but Ørsted and Eversource will be the first to charter it for use of the Sunrise Wind turbine installation. So it is under construction now, and we look forward to putting it to work, being the first to put it to work when Sunrise Wind is heading into construction. But as we build up the U.S. fleet with offshore wind supply vessels, this is it's hard to really capture the size of these vessels. They really are tremendous, but this is a major investment by Dominion, and we are really excited to have this opportunity to be the first to use it. Next slide. Partnerships with the university is also, a really important part of our success, and we have such a tremendous asset in Stony Brook University here on Long Island. This was a commitment that we made as part of our Sunrise Wind proposal. Stony Brook obviously is a very well recognized research university, and so this was a partnership that we launched earlier this year They have an advanced energy research and technology center that really has been spearheading this work together with the broader university. Obviously, there's a number of campuses at the university, from the School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences to the engineering school to the business school. They have a really extraordinary breadth of experts to support the future of offshore wind. And so we look forward to all of the good ideas that are coming out of Stony Brook University, and we have $5 million here that'll be put to work to bring some of those ideas to fruition. I'm proud to say that actually this made the list of top 10 news items for Stony Brook University as part of their sort of recap of 2021. So that was exciting, and yeah, we're really excited to have them as partners. Next slide. And speaking of other supply chain announcements, and I mentioned, jobs and investment is really a theme of offshore wind. It's about energy, but it's also about opportunity and investment. And we made this was a tremendous announcement that was made by the governor herself back in October. Her office was pleased to announce this $86 million award. It's the largest award to date in New York State, and a huge enabler of the supply chain that will support the fabrication and construction of advanced foundation components. So very technical sounding term, obviously, but you can see from the picture in the background, we have turbine stand-on foundations that are, in the case of our project Sunrise Wind and Southwark Wind, they're actual monopile foundations. So they look a little bit different than the ones that you see there, kind of single pile, one round, so one tube, if you will, in the water. But there are very complex and very large platforms that need to be fabricated and constructed to create those foundation platforms. And so this tremendous work scope has been awarded to a company called Riggs Distler. And the thing about supply chain awards is it's sort of like it's like the pebble in the pond. It creates a ripple effect of supply chain partners, local supply chain partners. And so Riggs Distler is the company that has the larger award, and they have a number of local entities that will be supporting this scope. One of the great stories coming out of this is actually the partnership with Lundstrom Steel, which is a company in Western New York, actually, Wellsville, New York, where they will be doing the steel prefabrication work, which will then get transported to the Port of Albany, where these very large pieces will be put together and then shipped out to the wind farm. So a bit of a technical aspect to this, but the punchline is it's an awful lot of jobs and an awful lot of investment in order to make this scope come together. Next slide. Another supply chain announcement that we made this year was with respect to our transmission system. Our Sunrise Wind will be using an HVDC system. I will say that HVDC systems are not new for submarine purposes. There's actually an HVDC submarine cable that connects under Jones Beach, for example, but we will be the first offshore wind project to use it. And it has a number of different benefits. It basically allows for us to use fewer cables. If you're familiar with AC power, DC power, the DC cable, the DC option allows us to reduce the number of cables that are needed to bring our power to shore. It also helps to reduce losses, for example, over those longer distances. It's really advanced technology, and it allows us to just carry our power farther, more economically, more efficiently. And so this very complex package has been awarded to Siemens Anker, and they too will have a local supply chain scope that will support their award. So as developers, a lot of people think that we sort of are responsible for all of the supply chain activity that happens. We actually enable very large contracts, which then we call those tier 1 contracts. Entities that contract directly with us are called tier 1 suppliers. And from there are companies that contract with a tier 1 supplier, and then someone contracts with a tier 2 supplier, if you follow me here. But it's really a chorus of supply chain that makes these projects come to fruition. And so this is one of our big ones, and we look forward to the local announcements of those contracts that will support this effort here on Long Island. Next slide. And so that recaps really 2021 and some of our milestones over the last several months. But we are just getting started still. For those of us who work in offshore wind every day, it does feel like we've been at this for a while, and really it's just the beginning of the story. Obviously, South Fork Wind is moving to construction this year, which is tremendously exciting. And there will be even more opportunities to announce with respect to supply chain for South Fork. Offshore construction will be starting up in 2023. And Sunrise Wind obviously has a ways to go in the permitting phase. There's still many opportunities for outreach and input as that project is finalized, its footprint is finalized, its mitigations and so on. We have science is a big part of what we do. We have a number of different initiatives to make sure that we're collecting the data that's needed to assess the potential impacts of our projects. And so those are opportunities that we look forward to announcing in 2022, together with workforce initiatives. The work scope, the very big work scope that I mentioned up in the capital region, that advanced component advanced foundation component supply chain award. It is a long phrase. There's a $1 million workforce development initiative that will accompany that. And so that's something that we'll see rolling out in 2022. Just funds being put to work to make sure that we can prepare people for these opportunities, that we can cast the net wide so that everyone has the opportunity to take advantage of these jobs that are coming to fruition as offshore wind advances. And then, a very important part of our commitment with respect to Sunrise Wind was also the National Offshore Wind Training Center. And that is something that we're working on with some terrific partners in labor and academia. And that's something that we'll see some news on in 2022 as well, together with some more supplier events, supply chain events. As I mentioned, offshore wind is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and whenever that kind of money is in play, there's a lot of opportunity to be had. So it's about we're working hard to make sure that everyone becomes aware of the opportunities that are coming and can understand how to be a part of it. And I think with that, we'll move to questions.
Great, thank you so much, Jen and Ken. The Jen and Ken team, for not the first time and surely for not the last time. I want to remind folks, although there's been a lot of activity, if you would like to ask a question, please drop it into the Q&A function. We will be sending around a recording of tonight's presentation with the thank you email to everyone who registered. So if you got here late, you'll be able to access that, and it will be available on, I think, both our and CCE's websites or YouTube pages. So there will be available later, just as a reminder. So we have a lot of questions. So I think Adrian and I are going to tag team to try and combine where they are and to try and get to as many questions as we can, but we may run out of time.
And some of you that already have 5 questions in there, if you can limit your own so other people can get a chance, that'd be good too.
All right, so I'm going to start. The question is, who's constructing the wind turbines? Are they being manufactured in the United States?
Dan, if you want, Jen. So for South Fork, we have announced it's the turbine manufacturer is Siemens Gamesa, and it's an 11 megawatt turbine, and they are manufactured in Europe.
Okay. I'm going to combine some of these only because we're up to almost 30 questions and we don't want to be here till tomorrow morning and have breakfast together. Just some of the environmental questions. So can you talk about what are the mitigation techniques that you'll be using to protect migratory whales in the area, and also for birds for the Atlantic flyway zone.
Sure. You know what? I did want to ask Melanie Guerin is on the line here, and I asked that she join us. Melanie is the permitting manager for South Fork Wind. She's also now supporting Sunrise Wind since we're moving to a different phase. And Melanie is she's a scientist. She's actually a fisheries scientist by background, and you know, she has been shepherding this project and so many of the environmental conditions. So Melanie, if you wouldn't mind coming on screen here.
Yeah, hi, can everybody hear me? Great. So
yes,
we'll take the whales. We'll take the whales first. It's a great question. We are working very closely with the federal government, in particular the National Marine Fisheries Service. And we have a particular authorization, it's called an Incidental Harassment Authorization, that's just been issued to the project for South Fork, for example. And that authorization has several measures in it, including soft start for pile driving measures. We're measuring sound source, sound source coming from the pile driving. We have vessel speed restrictions that are in place. And all of these are the types of measures that we have discussed, the sort of best management practices that we have in place and that will be required to be in compliance with during the construction period. Some of the other sort of pieces of that puzzle include protected species observers, both on our transiting vessels during construction and operations that'll be on the lookout for different endangered species and marine mammals, protected species such as sea turtles as well. So those observers are part of that overall equation. We also have during construction and actually some long-term monitoring where we're going to be using some passive acoustic monitoring systems or some underwater hydrophones that are going to be listening all the time for whale vocalizations and things like that. And, you know, during construction, that passive acoustic monitoring piece will be live. We'll be able to hear and recognize those calls right away. And we have, you know, stop gaps in place basically where if a sighting is made while, you know, we're doing a specific activity, then our activity then either gets scaled back or shut down until the area then clears of those particular protected species under the Endangered Species Act as well as the Marine Mammals Protection Act. So that's just sort of a glimpse at some of the mitigations that we're, you know, putting our best foot forward on. As you all know, the North Atlantic right whale is a species that quite a few folks are very concerned about. It's highly endangered, and we have actually a separate set of rules specific to that population as well. For the birds, we have sort of a slightly different set of mitigation, you know, a mitigation framework that we've put forth for South Fork. And you can expect that a lot of the same measures that I'm talking about here will also be put into place for the Sunrise project as well. For the birds, we actually are involved very closely with the Audubon Society and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on some different tagging projects. We're looking at pit tags on various different birds, as well as listening. And we've got sonars that are going to be radars that'll be mounted on various turbines so that we're always monitoring bird and also actually bat activity. We also have bird deterrent devices that we're required to mount on the turbines as well. So as well as one more thing, we will be doing boat-based surveys where we'll be doing bird counts around the turbines in the area of the projects.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to try to batch a couple of labor-related questions because we've gotten a number of them, and I think that they might be able to be answered together. One is pretty straightforward, is whether there's been a location selected for the National Offshore Wind Training. Two is sort of how many jobs there are for the longer term operation and maintenance. And then 3, which is in the sort of scope, is a question asking if contractors have been selected and subcontractors, and what that might mean for the labor unions and who they can be working with. Obviously, that would be for the South Fork project, because for Sunrise, I'm guessing you're not at that point in life. So how's those sort of for a batching of questions?
Sure. All right, so I can start off with respect to the National Offshore Wind Trading Center, we haven't announced a location for that just yet. It's an entity that's been created. They're actively working on site selection. So I do expect that'll be news in 2022. With respect to the O&M jobs, so we have, I mentioned, obviously, we've just done the first round of hiring, first 13 techs, is part of the first round of hiring. Obviously, South Fork Wind is a smaller wind farm. It's only 12 turbines. I can't say that the jobs scale up, at the same rate as do the turbines, for example. But they are obviously long-term jobs. We hope that you stay for your career, essentially, working as long as you can, working as an O&M technician. And so in terms of numbers, I think we have, I want to say it's about we should be well over like 20 at least by the time we get through Sunrise Wind. I think maybe 20, closer to 25 as we get to Sunrise Wind, just so to support the suite of projects that are in the Northeast.
I would add to that there's also going to be a control center, and there'll be 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So that'll include our workforce to do that. There'll be the planning and logistics function here in the U.S. that plans and schedules all of the maintenance activities. And to support the maintenance activities, we will be having helicopter service as well as vessel service that will, man the Jones Act compliant vessels that we're building. Several of those that Jen spoke about have already been announced. I saw in the chat that there was questions about how many vessels and where are they coming from. We procured several other vessels. We haven't made the announcement yet. But there are several other US-based vessels that are being constructed for our projects. And with that will come obviously the crews that are necessary to support that. That will be, while we're purchasing those vessels, we will crew them with a service provider, the same as for the helicopter service.
Thank you, Ken. I was thinking too literally about our O&M technicians.
Thank you for answering the question before we got to ask it too. Okay, we're going to go to the next one. We have several questions logged in here about the issue of the radar. So question is, how have you or how will you be able to rectify the issue of radar and potential interference by wind turbines as has been cited by the Coast Guard?
So there's a couple different concerns with offshore wind farms. The first is for radar used by the Department of Defense or the FAA, and that's primarily focused around air transportation. There's several studies out there. In fact, you can find them on the BOEM website. They've commissioned those studies, and they've come up with mitigation measures for both commercial aircraft as well as to address any of the military concerns. The military concerns also include search and rescue for the Coast Guard, which is probably the most critical activity that the Coast Guard does outside of, obviously protecting our coastlines. And we've agreed with the U.S. Coast Guard for a process that we would shut down wind turbines, including the entire wind farm, during their search and rescue operations. So if either a recreational boat user or a commercial fisherman were to have issues at sea and the Coast Guard had to respond, we've already made that commitment up front to curtail our operations during the times when they would have to do that search and rescue. There's a second group of concerns around the actual vessel radar and interference. And what we've found to date anyway, is that especially the older radars are susceptible to backscatter or misoperation within the wind farm itself. And what we've provided is a method to upgrade radar systems for commercial fishermen at no cost to them as part of our program. And that will both give them the latest technology, but also a technology that is least susceptible to any of these impacts of operating within the wind farm itself.
Thank you.
There's a few questions about costs. So the question is, how much does the cost per megawatt versus other countries, or how is this going to impact ratepayers? I think those are a couple of questions that have been asked about cost relative to either existing energy or energy in in other parts of the world.
Sure. So we can speak to certainly the cost of our projects here. I'll start with the South Fork Wind. That was obviously a contract with LIPA, and that particular contract can help me out here with the pricing that I recall, because it's been a little while since we talked about this.
There's actually two tiers to it. The first tier. Yeah. Original 90 megawatts is priced at about 16 cents per kilowatt hour. The second tier, or 40 megawatts, is priced at about 8.6 cents a kilowatt hour. So the composite is around 14 cents. So that is, I would say, a premium to fossil-based generation at this point. It is probably less costly than solar at this point. And the costs for that also escalate at a 2% per year. The price in a little bit different type of contract for Sunrise. That's an all-in price for renewable energy credits, ORECs, and that's at about 11 cents per kilowatt hour. So there is an economy of scale with a larger wind farm. But it's still priced above, say, the wholesale market, which in New York clears with natural gas.
And I think we should mention that, NYSERDA, obviously, this is the NYSERDA Offshore Wind Master Plan is a statewide program. And so NYSERDA has said, when the first two contracts that were a part of, that came from the solicitation that they ran back in 2019, that's the contract, the procurement that Sunrise Wind was a part of. There's also a project by Equinor. And NYSERDA said that the cost to the average ratepayer for those two projects combined was less than $1 per month. So just to do it in terms of how it affects, someone's wallet, so to speak.
And important to remember that we are currently not factoring in all the pollution costs associated with fossil fuel power outside of some carbon pricing through the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative.
And I think sorry, I was just going to say, in addition to that, if you look at the cost of oil, which went up $3 a barrel in one day last week, and now it's up to $81 a barrel, up from $70 a barrel just a month ago. It's a very volatile and unpredictable world for fossil fuels. And for the cost of wind, we know what it's going to be for 20 years. There'll be a 2% increase per year escalation clause, and that's it. It's not subject to geopolitical circumstances or resources.
Good point.
Okay, let's move on to the next questions. I'm just going to ask a few of the short ones. I'm going to ask two. One is someone's asking, will the pylon anchors be designed to provide marine life habitat? And then another good question is, do you expect the timeline to shorten in the future? If so, by how much? And how does the timeline in America compare to other countries? So let's ask the anchorage question first. Answer that one first.
Melanie, do you want to take that one?
Sure.
Scientist?
Yeah, so around the base of where the pylons are going to come in, these monopiles are going to come into the seafloor, and almost like in a donut shape around each of those, we're going to be placing something that we call scour protection. And that's that sort of anchoring system that I think you're thinking about. That material, the Scour Protection, is typically made out of sort of chopped up rocks and stones. And so that typically does support, you know, it increases and it supports sort of that complex habitat, or that habitat that Ken was talking about earlier, that's that essential fish habitat that really does support spawning of fish populations. So we do anticipate there being some positive net benefits to them, to that Scour Protection being on the seafloor and acting almost as like an artificial reef. There's also, you know, some other mitigations that we were talking about with federal government near the locations of the monopiles that, you know, actually may be some structural. We may actually go in and put what they call some nature inclusive designs down, or some structural pieces on the seafloor nearby that actually even increases that reef effect even more. And we may also run some experiments or some surveys that kind of observe, especially in the first few phases where we've got these turbines installed, sort of how beneficial those types of nature inclusive designs are. Try to get some data points on it.
I think the second part of that question was around the duration and timeline. I think in general, we're seeing you know, our Revolution wind project and our Sunrise wind projects that have come after South Fork. We see the timeline being a little bit compressed, but I still think with a full environmental review we do under the National Environmental Policy Act, that we're still going to see a pretty lengthy duration from the time, say in February, when the new leases are leased in New York and New Jersey, until they actually, you know, go into operation. That's still multiple years to go through that process. You go through you secure the lease, there's a site assessment process, then there's a COP process, ultimately federal permits, and the state permits are usually within that time frame. But that overall process, for example, for South Fork, those leases were secured in 2013. We're going into construction in 2022. So I think the process will be shortened, but I still think it's going to be an extended process versus other countries where, in most times, when the auction is held, it comes with all of the permits necessary for that project. So they go right to the execution phase at that point.
So
yeah,
I think that
important point. I was just going to say, sorry, that you know, it's just interesting how it's a real difference in how we do business, right, with respect to offshore wind, is that in other countries often they do permit first, so the bid is more precisely on the construction phase, and we're kind of doing both on parallel tracks here.
All right, so we want to try to get some more questions. Julie, you're next.
Yeah, so I'm going to try and do what you did, a few short questions. I think you just kind of answered this one question, but is there a layout for the turbines for the Sunrise project? I think the answer is probably not yet.
So a final layout, no, that will come out of the environmental impact statement and the environmental review. There's a draft layout in our construction operation plan, but many of those turbines and those turbine positions will probably be removed through the various processes of either visual impacts, probably not so much for Sunrise, but probably more for the essential fish habitat or other things that we find within that lease area, cultural resources such as shipwrecks or other things that are, you know, in the waters off the coast.
Great. What type of stand will be used for the wind turbine? I think we've kind of answered this already, but
the monopile.
Yeah.
So in general, these are 10 or 11 meter diameter monopoles, or monopiles, I should say. So they're 30 plus feet across, and depending upon the depth of water and the type of soil conditions at the exact location is how long or how tall they are. So they basically come out of the water, as you can see on the pictures, several meters above the water line. And then the advanced foundation component with a platform, the railings, the ladders are placed on top of the monopile, and then on top of that goes the monopole for the wind turbine generator itself.
Okay.
Let's get to some from Sorry, were you done, Julie?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, let's get some from Surfrider here from Matt. Do the lawsuits against Vineyard Wind affect either of your projects, Ørsted's projects, directly or indirectly? And also, is the Sunrise Wind project planning on using open loop cooling for the offshore DC substation?
So I can take the first one. Maybe Mel can take the second one. She can describe the impacts of that open loop system more than I can. But yes, I mean, the lawsuits that I'm aware of against Vineyard Wind, which there may be more than I'm aware of, they're challenging the approvals by the federal agencies, including the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and the Department of Interior. If those challenges were to be sustained or were successful, that might have impact on our permits as well.
So the second part of the question about the open loop cooling system, yes, we are right now, the project has proposed to utilize such a system. To kind of go back to some of the, the points that Ken was making and Jen was making about the DC system, we need to have a cooling system on the converter station offshore. That's that offshore substation. When we convert the electricity from AC to DC at that station and then send it up down across the export cable, we need that cooling system to basically efficiently cool that process. And that also helps with electrical losses. We basically see that cooling system sort of reduces that risk for losing more electricity as well. So that open loop cooling system is it contains sort of two components. One is an intake, an ocean water intake. That's usually mounted typically about 10 meters off the bottom below the converter station in the water, that pipe. That pipe takes in seawater, comes through the system, and then there's a discharge. And the caisson for the discharge is about 12 meters below the surface of the water. So the reason why we have things, more mid-water column is because we don't want to be near the seabed, wherever the water is getting intaked or discharged. Now at the intake, we have screens, various different mitigations that we put in place, in addition to mounting that intake and discharge sort of mid-water column so that it doesn't affect the seafloor. We also have screens in place that help not, entrain and impinge fish and marine life. So there will be there's some impingement that occurs sort of inevitable with some ichthyoplankton and smaller critters and plankton in the water column. But as everybody knows, those animals are pretty ubiquitous and there's a lot out there. So yes, we do plan to use that system, and we're trying to work with the agency as well and look at technology that's out there to continue to sort of develop what mitigations we can have in place. We're also looking at doing assessments to support what we think those impacts are going to be. And that will be part of the overall federal assessment and the environmental review.
All right, thank you for
Thank
that.
you.
Two, I think, related questions is, one is, how do you plan to work with low wind speed and high wind speed, which may impact the ability of the turbines to work properly? I'm not answering this question well. Asking that question, and I'll start with that one.
So on average, the capacity factor for an offshore wind farm is around 50%, but there's variability both throughout the day as well as seasonally. Seasonally, in the winter months, like where we are now, you can get up to a 60% capacity factor. In the summer months, the summer doldrums, you tend to be down closer to the 40%. But over the 8,760 hours per year, the average is around 50%. So the South Fork wind farm on average will put out 66 megawatts on every hour on the hour. Obviously, there's variability. High wind speeds above 70 miles an hour, the turbine itself starts to take actions, feathering into the wind, locking the blades in a certain position and kind of hunkering down for the storms we could see here in the Northeast. The ratings on this equipment, both the foundations as well as the turbines, are rated for the hurricanes that we normally see here in the Northeast. As far as low wind speeds go, one of the things that the manufacturers are doing now, and one of the advantages of the longer blades, is better low speed wind performance. So they're starting to be able to operate at much slower wind speeds than the previous generation of turbines had. And as we go forward into the 14, 16, 20 megawatt turbines, I think they'll probably also have superior low wind speed performance than even the turbines that we're using.
So sort of related to that, and then we probably, Adrian, you want to ask one more and then we can wrap up here because it's 8:26, is the question of, is there an opportunity for onshore battery storage or offshore battery storage associated with turbine sites to sort of smooth out some of the things that you're talking about now?
Yes. So most people don't realize, but East Hampton Substation also has a battery storage unit. And Montauk Substation has a battery storage unit. LIPA purposely combined those two battery storage units with the South Fork Wind Project. So they were thinking ahead several years ago when they did this solicitation, and those two are actually in service today and operating. So yes, there's certainly an opportunity for coupling onshore battery storage with renewable energy. Doesn't necessarily have to be offshore wind, could be onshore wind, could be solar, to extend those valleys while using the peak energy when it may not be needed in the middle of the night. Also, there's lots of activity going on now with hydrogen and being able to produce hydrogen. Ørsted has some fairly large commercial projects advancing in Europe for the offshore wind energy in the form of hydrogen. Much more dense than, say, battery storage. So that has great promise in the future as well.
All right, we're going to get in two quick last questions. One is John wants to know, which I think is a good question, are there performance guarantees for output for either of the projects? And the second to last one is if you could just be a little clearer. Bernard's asking the interconnecting cables between the turbines. Do they drop straight down from the turbine and then run along the bottom of the sea and then connect to the next one? Just mention how that works.
So two completely different questions, but that's okay.
Yes.
Performance
I'm
guarantees.
trying to get them in here. I mean, you're here and there's a big audience and they're trying to get their questions answered. So we're squeezing them in there, Ken. So you could do it.
So we get paid when the turbines operate and we deliver to our customers, either NYSERDA or LIPA. If we don't deliver, we don't get paid. So we have a vested interest in making sure the maximum output from these turbines is done in a safe manner. The second question around how do the cables come up? They come up, they go from each turbine to turbine. In our case, it's a 66 kV medium voltage AC cable, 3 conductors in a bundle about this size. They come along the seafloor and then go up into the foundation at a hole in the foundation and into the bottom of the advanced foundation component, or that thing that's just above the water, the platform. And that's where the electrical cables from the turbine connect with those cables. On the substation end, again, they come up through a tube, let's say, that goes into the water, and they go into the switch gear on the offshore substation on the other end.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. I'll be very brief and then I'll turn it over to Adrian. But thank you again to Jen and to Ken and to Mel for answering so many questions tonight. We have more questions in the queue, and I'm sorry we're not able to get to them all, but we certainly were glad to see so many people so actively engaged and people staying so long. I can assure you that we will be holding more of these forums in the future to keep people apprised of issues, both NYLCV Education Fund and Citizens Campaign for the Environment. I would encourage you all to follow both of our organizations and Ørsted and Eversource on social media and signing up for our email list so you get more information. So keep an eye out for that on both offshore wind and on clean energy. As I mentioned earlier, The recording of this will be sent to everyone who registered, and it will be available on NYLCV and CCE's YouTube channels. So thank you so much. And Adrian?
Yeah, just again, thank you for everyone for participating. We had a really large audience. I know it's frustrating when some of your questions are asked, but you didn't get them to have, we didn't get to answer them. We did try to move through them as expeditiously as we could, but we will be having more of these. Stay tuned. We're going to be breaking ground with, New York State's first offshore wind farm this year. It's a reason to celebrate. There will be a lot of questions as they come up, as they should. And we are going to provide forums for you to be able to ask questions to the people who know. So thank you again, everybody.
Have a good night.